America doesn't just benefit from black people, it depends on us. I'm not talking about culture, not just music, sports, or style. I'm talking about the actual structure of the country, the parts that keep it running, the parts that made it powerful in the first place. Without African Americans, America doesn't look the same. It doesn't grow the same. It doesn't win the same. And in some cases, it doesn't exist the way you know it. That's not exaggeration. That's history. Let me break it down fast. You ever wonder why America became a global superpower so early? Why it moved faster than most countries? Why it built wealth at a level nobody could touch for a long time? A huge part of that answer is black labor. Not optional, not a side detail, the foundation. For generations, black people were producing massive amounts of wealth, agriculture, infrastructure, raw materials without being paid for it. That wealth didn't disappear. It got absorbed into banks, into businesses, into the economy that still exists today. That's step one. America's early dominance, built on it. Now move forward, because it didn't stop there. After emancipation, you don't suddenly get equality. You get pressure, restrictions, limits on where you can live, work, build. And what happens? Black communities create their own systems, their own businesses, their own networks, their own culture. And that culture, that becomes one of America's biggest exports. Music alone changed the entire world. Jazz, blues, hip hop. You don't just hear that in the US, you hear it everywhere. And when the world consumes your culture, they start paying attention to your country. That's influence, that's power. But it goes deeper than that, because influence isn't just about entertainment. It's about innovation. You look at technology, science, medicine. Black Americans have been contributing at every level, even when they weren't allowed in the room. Think about that. People building solutions for a system that didn't fully accept them. That kind of pressure produces a different level of creativity, a different mindset. You get problem solvers, adaptable thinkers, people who can take limited resources and still create something valuable. That's an asset to any country. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable for some people, because America doesn't just benefit from black excellence. It reacts to black struggle. Every major shift toward freedom, rights, and equality in this country, black Americans pushed it, forced it, moved it forward. Civil rights didn't just happen. They were demanded, fought for. And once those rights expand, they don't just apply to one group. They open doors for everybody. That's a pattern. Black pressure creates national progress. And that's not a small detail. That's structural. Now think about modern America, the global image, the influence, the culture, the conversation. How much of that is shaped by black Americans? A lot. And not just in obvious ways. Language, style, trends. Entire industries shift based on what black communities create. That's not coincidence. That's impact. And here's the key point most people miss. When you remove something that deeply embedded from a system, the system changes. Sometimes it slows down. Sometimes it loses relevance. Sometimes it collapses in areas you didn't even realize were connected, because everything is connected: economics, culture, politics, innovation. And African Americans are woven into all of it. Now let's be real for a second. This isn't about saying one group is everything. It's about understanding how important certain contributions actually are. Because when something is constantly used, relied on, and built into the system, but rarely acknowledged properly, people start to underestimate it. And when you underestimate something that important, you misunderstand how the system works. That's where we are right now. A lot of people see the surface, they see headlines, they see stereotypes. They don't see the structure underneath. They don't see how much depends on Black Americans continuing to contribute, create, and push. Now, here's why this matters. Because if you don't understand what holds something up, you don't understand what happens when it's removed or weakened or ignored. And that's a dangerous place to be for any country. So when we say America needs African Americans, we're not saying it for effect. We're saying it because history, economics, and reality all point to the same thing. This country has been shaped, challenged, and strengthened by Black Americans at every stage. And without that, you're looking at a completely different nation. Less innovative, less influential, less resilient. Now that's the big picture. But the real story, it gets way more specific. Because once you zoom in, you start seeing exactly how this plays out in ways most people never even think about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's zoom in. Because saying America depends on African Americans sounds big, but where exactly? Let's talk about the engine, the part that actually moves the country forward. Start with labor, not the old version you already know. Right now, today, who's overrepresented in the hardest, most physically demanding, lowest paid jobs that still keep everything running? Black Americans are right there. Warehouses, transportation, logistics, healthcare support, food systems, the stuff that doesn't look glamorous, but everything falls apart without it. You don't notice it when it's working. You definitely notice it when it stops. That's one layer. Now let's shift, because it's not just physical labor, it's economic circulation. Black Americans spend over $1 trillion a year. Let that sit for a second. That's not a niche market. That's a major force. Companies study Black consumers. They follow trends coming out of Black communities. They design products around it. Because if you capture that attention, you move the market. That's influence at scale, and it's consistent. Now here's where it gets interesting. Black culture doesn't just participate in the economy, it drives it. Think about how trends start. Fashion, music, language, social media. A lot of what becomes mainstream starts somewhere else first. Then it spreads. Then it gets adopted. Then it gets monetized. That pipeline, that's been happening for decades. And companies know it. That's why they watch closely. Because they understand something simple. If you know where Black culture is going, you can predict where the market is going. That's power. Now let's talk about innovation, because people love to reduce this conversation to entertainment. But that's surface level. Look deeper. Necessity creates creativity. When you grow up navigating systems that aren't built for you, you learn how to adapt fast. You learn how to solve problems differently. You learn how to make something out of limited resources. That mindset translates everywhere. Business, tech, science, education. You get people who think in ways others don't because they had to. That's not just resilience, that's skill. And that skill benefits the entire system. Now let's go somewhere people don't expect. Politics. Every major shift in American democracy, Black Americans have been involved in pushing it forward. Voting rights, civil rights, representation. These aren't small adjustments. These are structural changes. And once they happen, they don't just help one group. They reshape the whole system, expand access, increase participation, force accountability. That pressure improves the system overall, even for people who never think about where it came from. That's another layer. Now here's something even more direct. Military. Black Americans have served in every major conflict in U.S. history. while dealing with discrimination at home. Think about that combination. Fighting for a country that didn't fully fight for you. That's not a small contribution. That's commitment at a level most people don't even process. And it matters because military strength is part of national power, always has been. Now let's bring it back to something simple. Problem solving under pressure. America faces challenges constantly. Economic shifts, social tension, global competition, and in those moments, you need people who can operate under stress, people who can adapt, people who don't break when things get difficult. That's not abstract. That's real. And it shows up across industries, across communities, across generations. Now, put all of this together: labor, spending power, cultural influence, innovation, political pressure, military service, problem solving. That's not one lane. That's multiple systems, all connected, all active at the same time. And African Americans are present in every one of them. Not occasionally, consistently. Now here's the part people don't always want to say out loud. If you remove that level of contribution, you don't just lose one thing, you create gaps, big ones. Gaps in labor, gaps in creativity, gaps in economic movement, gaps in cultural relevance. And those gaps don't just sit there. They affect everything connected to them. That's how systems work. Now imagine trying to replace all of that. Not just the numbers, the influence, the mindset, the innovation. You can't just swap that out overnight. It doesn't work like that. Because this isn't just about presence. It's about impact, repeated impact over time. That shapes the system itself. Now let's keep it real. A lot of people see individual success stories, athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, and they think that's the whole picture. It's not. That's just the visible part. The real story is underneath. The everyday contributions, the systems being held up quietly, the influence spreading in ways most people don't track. That's where the real weight is. And that's why this conversation matters. Because when you understand the depth of contribution, you understand the level of dependence. And once you understand that, you start seeing things differently. Now, here's where we're going next. Because we've talked about systems, but we haven't talked about what happens when those systems get pushed. When pressure hits, when things start to break, that's when you really see who the system relies on and what happens when that support shifts. Because history already gave us examples, clear ones. And once you see those moments, you will understand this on a whole different level. Let's test it. Not a theory, not a guess. History already ran the experiment. What happens when Black contribution gets restricted, ignored, or pushed out? Things don't stay stable. They shift fast. Start with economics. After slavery ended, you'd expect the system to adjust smoothly, right? It didn't. The entire Southern economy struggled. Why? Because it had been built almost entirely on Black labor. Take that away without restructuring the system properly, you don't get balance. You get instability, production drops, wealth slows down. The system has to rebuild itself from scratch. That's not a small disruption. That's a shock. Now move forward. Early 1900s, Black communities start building independent economies, businesses, banks, neighborhoods, places where money circulates within the community, and they work. They grow fast. Some of them become extremely successful. And what happens? They get targeted, destroyed, undermined. Now think about that. You remove a thriving economic system. You don't just hurt that community. You remove competition. You remove innovation. You remove economic diversity. That affects the broader economy too. Less competition means less pressure to improve. Less pressure means slower growth. That's how systems weaken. Now, let's shift again, because it's not just about money, it's about culture. There have been moments where black voices were suppressed heavily. Limited access to media, limited platforms, limited visibility. And every time that happens, mainstream culture gets stale, predictable, less creative. Because you've cut off one of the main sources of new ideas, then what happens? Eventually, those voices break through again, and everything shifts. Music changes, language changes, style changes, energy comes back. That pattern repeats over and over. Now let's talk about workforce impact. You ever notice what happens when essential workers aren't available? Everything slows down. We've seen it recently. Supply chains break. Hospitals get overwhelmed. Services stop functioning properly. And guess what? Black Americans are heavily represented in many of those essential roles. So when there's disruption there, the effects spread quickly. This isn't abstract. This is real-time impact. Now here's another angle people don't think about. Talent pipelines. When access is limited for a group that produces high levels of talent, you don't just hurt that group. You shrink the overall talent pool. That means fewer innovators, fewer leaders, fewer problem solvers. That affects industries long term. Tech, medicine, education, business, all of it. Because talent isn't evenly distributed by opportunity. It's often blocked by it. So when you open access, you get more breakthroughs. When you restrict it, you slow progress down. Simple. Now let's go deeper. Social stability. When a group that plays a major role in a country feels ignored, undervalued, or pressured, tension builds. And tension doesn't just sit quietly, it shows up. Protests, movements, demand for change. And some people see that as disruption, but look closer. Those moments often lead to necessary corrections. Laws improve, systems get updated, rights expand. That's the system adjusting. Without that pressure, those changes don't happen as fast. Sometimes they don't happen at all. So even the tension plays a role. That's uncomfortable for some people, but it's real. Now let's bring it all together. Every time black contribution is limited, you see a pattern. Economic instability, cultural stagnation, workforce disruption, reduced innovation, increased tension. That's not coincidence. That's cause and effect. You pull on one thread and multiple parts of the system react because they're connected. Now here's the part that hits different. Most people don't notice this while it's happening. They only see pieces, a protest here, a slowdown there, a cultural shift somewhere else. They don't connect it. But when you step back, the pattern is clear. And once you see the pattern, you can't ignore it. Now ask yourself something simple. If limiting a group's contribution causes that many problems, what does that say about how important that contribution is? Exactly. Now we're not done, because there's another layer to this. And this one is even more direct. We've talked about what happens when things get restricted. Next, we're going to talk about what happens when Black Americans lead, when they have space, access, opportunity, because that's when you see the full potential, not just survival, not just adaptation, expansion, acceleration. That's where things really take off. And when that happens, the entire country moves differently, faster, stronger, more competitive. That's the part a lot of people haven't fully processed yet. But once you see it, it changes how you look at everything. Watch this. Every time Black Americans get real access, real opportunity, not surface level, things don't just improve, they accelerate fast. Let's start simple. World War II ends. The U.S. economy is booming, but access still isn't equal. Then over time, more doors begin to open, slowly, unevenly, but it starts happening. Education access expands, job opportunities widen, and what do you see? A surge in black professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, educators, not a trickle, a wave. Because the talent was always there, it just wasn't being used. That's the first thing people miss. Access doesn't create talent, it reveals it. Now, take that same idea and apply it to business. When black entrepreneurs get funding, support, and visibility, they don't just build businesses. They build ecosystems, they hire, they circulate money, they create new markets. And here's what's interesting. A lot of these businesses don't just serve one group. They influence everyone. Food trends, fashion brands, tech platforms, service models. You see innovation that spreads outward. That's expansion. Now let's talk about entertainment, but not the surface level. Yes, music and film matter, but look at the scale, global scale. Black American culture has shaped global entertainment more than most countries. Not just influenced it, shaped it. Genres, styles, performance, storytelling. And when black creators get more control, ownership, creative freedom, distribution power, the output changes, it gets sharper, more original, more impactful, and the world responds. That's not luck. That's unlocked potential. Now shift again. Sports. People love to talk about dominance here, but look deeper. It's not just about winning games. It's about redefining what's possible. Training methods evolve, play styles change, standards rise, and those changes don't stay in one league, they spread across sports, across countries, across generations. That's influence beyond the scoreboard. Now here's a big one. Technology. This is where people still underestimate things. When black professionals gain access to tech spaces, you get different perspectives on problem solving, different approaches to design, different priorities, and that matters because technology shapes how people live. If the people building it all think the same way, you get limited solutions. When you expand who's building it, you expand what's possible. That's how innovation actually grows. Now let's talk about education. When black students get access to better resources, better schools, better support systems, what happens? Performance rises, graduation rates improve, leadership pipelines grow. And those students don't just succeed individually. They go back into communities. They mentor. They build programs. They create pathways for others. That multiplies impact. Now zoom out, because this isn't about isolated success stories. This is about pattern. Whenever access increases, output increases. Whenever barriers drop, progress speeds up. That's consistent across industry, across decades, across generations. Now here's the part that really hits. When black Americans succeed at higher levels, it doesn't take anything away from the country. It adds to it. More businesses, more innovation, more cultural influence, more global competitiveness. It's not a trade-off. It's a boost. And yet, that idea still gets resisted sometimes, which doesn't make sense when you actually look at the results. Now think about this. If partial access already creates this level of impact, what would full access look like? No barriers, no limitations, pure competition based on ability. That's not just a fairness question. That's a performance question, because a country that uses all of its talent outperforms one that doesn't every time. Now let's get even more real. Other countries are watching. They study the US. not just the economy, the culture, the innovation, the influence. And a big part of that comes from Black American contribution. That's part of what gives the US its edge globally, its cultural dominance, its creative power, its ability to set trends worldwide. Take that away, or even reduce it, and that edge weakens. Now flip it, strengthen it. You increase that edge, you stay ahead. That's strategic, not just social. Now bring it back to the core idea. When you let Black Americans operate at full capacity, you don't just get participation, you get acceleration across the board. That's the difference. And we've seen enough examples to know this isn't a theory, it's a pattern, a repeatable one. Now, here's where we go next. Because understanding the impact is one thing, but there's a deeper question. Why does this pattern exist in the first place? Why is the influence so strong? Why does it show up across so many different areas? That's not random. There are specific reasons behind it. And once you understand those reasons, boom, this whole conversation levels up. Because then you're not just seeing the impact, you're understanding the source. Let me say this straight. Pressure creates precision. That's the core of it. When people have to survive in systems that don't fully support them, they don't just adapt, they sharpen. Decision-making gets faster, creativity gets tighter, instinct gets stronger, because mistakes cost more. That kind of environment builds a different type of skill set, not theoretical, practical, real time. Now stack that over generations. You don't just get individuals who are sharp. You get a culture that values sharpness, that rewards innovation, that celebrates turning nothing into something. That's where a lot of this influence comes from. It's not random talent. It's developed ability. Now think about communication. Black American culture has a strong emphasis on expression, storytelling, the rhythm, delivery. That's not accidental. That comes from needing to be heard in environments where you're often overlooked. So when that communication style enters music, media, public speaking, it stands out immediately. It connects, it moves people. That's influence. Now, layer in adaptability. When you've had to navigate different environments constantly, different expectations, different pressures, you get good at reading situations, adjusting quickly, finding angles others don't see. That translates into business, into leadership, into creativity, because you're not locked into one way of thinking. You move. That's an advantage. Now, here's something people don't talk about enough. Resourcefulness. When resources are limited, you learn how to stretch them, maximize them, flip them into something bigger. That's how you get innovation. Not from abundance, from constraint. That's why some of the most impactful ideas don't come from perfect conditions. They come from people who had to figure things out. And that mindset doesn't disappear when conditions improve. It scales. Now let's talk about cultural confidence. Even in the face of pressure, Black American culture has maintained a strong sense of identity, style, voice, presence. That matters because influence requires visibility. If you shrink yourself, your impact shrinks with you. But when a culture stays expressive, bold, and distinct, it becomes impossible to ignore. That's how ideas spread. Now combine all of that. Precision from pressure, strong communication, adaptability, resourcefulness, cultural confidence. You put those together, you don't get average output. You get high impact output consistently across different fields. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. This influence doesn't stay contained. It travels fast because it's relatable, it's human. It speaks to struggle, creativity, resilience, and growth. Those are universal themes. So when they're expressed powerfully, people everywhere connect to them. That's why the reach is global. Now let's ground this again. Think about trends. Where do a lot of them start? Music, language, fashion, movement, and how quickly do they spread once they catch? That speed isn't accidental. It's because the foundation is strong. People feel it immediately. Now here's the part people underestimate. Consistency. This level of influence hasn't shown up once or twice. It shows up repeatedly across decades, different generations, different industries. That's not luck. That's structure. That's a system producing results over time, even with obstacles. Now, imagine removing those obstacles completely. That's where the real question starts. Because if high impact is happening under pressure, what happens with full support, full access, full investment? That's not just improvement, that's multiplication. Now let's get real for a second. Some people look at this and only see culture, entertainment, surface level influence. They miss the deeper layer, the skills behind it, the systems behind it, the mindset behind it. That's why they underestimate it. But once you see the structure, you understand why the impact shows up everywhere, not just in one space. Now, bring it back to the main question. Why does America need African Americans? Because this isn't just participation. This is high efficiency contribution built under pressure, refined over time, and proven across industries. That's not something you replace. That's something you invest in. Now we're about to take this even further because we talked about the why. We've talked about the impact. Next, we're going to talk about something a lot of people avoid. What happens if this contribution is ignored long term? Not restricted for a moment, not slowed down temporarily, ignored completely. Because that scenario, it changes everything, and not in a subtle way. Let's not dance around it. If you ignore a major source of innovation, culture, and labor long term, you don't stay the same, you decline. Slow at first, then all at once. Start with culture because that's the easiest to see. Take away one of the strongest drivers of global trends. Music shifts, fashion dulls, language loses edge. The world stops looking to you the same way. And that matters more than people think. Cultural influence isn't just entertainment. It's soft power. It's how a country shapes perception without force. Lose that, you lose global attention. And once attention shifts somewhere else, it's hard to get it back. Now let's talk economics. Innovation slows when you reduce the diversity of thought in a system. Not because diversity is a buzzword, because different lived experiences produce different solutions. If you limit that, you get repetition, safer ideas, less breakthrough thinking. And in a global economy, that's dangerous because other countries are pushing hard. They're investing in talent, all of it, not some of it. So if you're leaving potential on the table, you're falling behind. Simple. Now let's bring it to workforce reality. If a significant portion of your workforce feels disconnected, undervalued, or blocked, productivity doesn't stay high. Engagement drops, trust drops, efficiency drops. And those drops don't stay isolated. They ripple across industries, across systems. That's how cracks start forming. Not from one big collapse, from multiple small ones happening at the same time. Now think about leadership pipelines. If access stays uneven, you don't just lose current talent. You lose future leaders, people who would have built companies, led institutions, driven change. That loss doesn't show up immediately. It shows up years later when you realize the people who could have stepped up were never given the chance. That's not just unfair. That's inefficient. Now, here's a piece people don't like to talk about: morale, national morale. If a country consistently underuses part of its population, there's a psychological cost. People notice. Even if they can't fully explain it, it affects how people feel about the system, whether they believe in it, whether they trust it. And once that belief starts to weaken, everything else gets harder. Now let's zoom out again. Global competition. Countries compete in more ways than just military or economy. They compete in innovation, culture, influence, talent attraction. If the U.S. wants to stay ahead, it needs all of its advantages, not some, all. And Black American contribution is one of those advantages, historically proven, globally recognized, consistently impactful. You don't sideline that, you scale it. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a country that fully invests in all of its talent, removes barriers, encourages innovation from every corner, supports growth across the board. That country moves faster, adapts quicker, leads more often. That's the difference. Now bring it back. Because this isn't about hypotheticals. We've already seen smaller versions of this play out. Moments where contribution was limited and systems struggled. Moments where access increased and everything sped up. So the pattern is clear. Ignore it, you slow down. Use it, you level up. Now here's the real question. Why would any country choose slowdown? That's what this comes down to. Because this isn't just a moral conversation. It's a strategic one. It's about performance, efficiency, growth, position, all the things countries care about. Now let's get even more direct. If America wants to stay competitive in the next 50 years, it can't afford to waste talent. Not at the scale we're talking about. That's not a small margin. That's a major percentage of potential. And in a world where margins decide everything, that matters. Now here's where we go next, because we've talked about the risk, we've talked about the impact, but there's something deeper underneath all of this, a mindset shift, because the way people frame this conversation changes how they respond to it. If you see this as charity, you move one way. If you see this as strategy, you move another. And that difference changes outcomes, big time. Let's clean this up. Nobody's asking a country to be nice. Countries don't run on kindness. They run on advantage. So when we talk about investing in Black Americans, we're not talking about favors. We're talking about maximizing output. That's it. That's the frame. Now watch how different it sounds when you say it that way. You're not giving opportunities. You're unlocking production. You're not fixing inequality. You're removing inefficiency. You're not helping a group. You're strengthening a system. That's a completely different conversation. And it leads to completely different decisions. Now think about how high-performing systems work. Businesses, sports teams, tech companies, they don't ignore talent. They don't say, we'll just use some of our best players. They find the best, develop the best, use the best, because winning depends on it. A country is no different. Same logic, bigger scale. Now here's where people get stuck. They attach emotion to the conversation, but ignore performance. And once that happens, they start making decisions that don't make sense long term, because they're not asking the right question. The right question isn't who deserves what. The right question is what makes the system perform at the highest level. That's the question every successful country answers well. Now apply it here. If one group consistently produces high cultural impact, strong innovation, essential labor, and leadership potential, why would you limit that? You wouldn't. Not if you're thinking strategically. Now let's talk numbers without getting technical. Every time you expand access to education, business funding, and leadership opportunities, you increase economic output. More businesses get created. More jobs get filled. More money circulates. That's growth. And growth benefits everyone in the system, not just one group. That's the part people miss. This isn't a zero-sum situation. Nobody has to lose for someone else to win here. When the system expands, everyone has more room. Now let's talk about innovation again, but sharper this time. Innovation doesn't come from comfort. It comes from pressure, perspective, and problem solving. And when you combine different perspectives, you get stronger solutions. That's why the most successful companies in the world look for diverse teams, not to check a box, to perform better, to win. So if that logic applies to companies, why wouldn't it apply to a country? It does, exactly the same way. Now here's something people don't like to admit. Ignoring this isn't neutral. It's costly. You don't just stay where you are, you fall behind. Because while one system is limiting itself, another system is optimizing. And in competition, optimization wins every time. Now bring it back to the bigger picture. America's strength has always come from its ability to pull talent from different places, different backgrounds, different experiences, and turn that into something powerful. That's the advantage. That's the formula. So when you fully include Black Americans in that formula, you're not changing it, you're completing it. Now here's the part that hits hard. If you look at this through a strategic lens, the question isn't, why should America invest? The question becomes, how much stronger could it be if it fully did? That's a different level of thinking. That's forward thinking. Now imagine the outcomes. Stronger economy, faster innovation, more global influence, more stability. That's not a dream scenario. That's a logical result of maximizing talent. Now let's take it one step further, because strategy isn't just about present performance, it's about future positioning. Who's ready for what's coming next? Technology shifts, global competition, economic changes, all of it. If you're not using all your talent, you're not ready. Simple. Now let's ground it again. This conversation isn't about rewriting history. It's about understanding reality right now and making smarter decisions moving forward. That's it. No fluff, no distraction. Now here's where we go next, because we've talked about strategy, we've talked about impact, we've talked about risk. But there's one final piece, and this is the part that ties everything together: identity. Because how a country sees itself shapes what it does next. And right now, that identity is still being figured out. Let's be honest. America likes to tell a certain story about itself. Freedom, opportunity, hard work pays off. Sounds good. But that story doesn't mean anything if it only works halfway. A system proves itself by what it does under pressure, not by what it says. And America has been under pressure from day one. Different groups, different challenges, different moments where the system had to decide what it really stood for. And every time, Black Americans have been right in the middle of that decision, pushing it, testing it, forcing it to live up to its own claims. That's not a side role. That's central. Now, think about identity, not branding, not slogans, actual identity. What makes a country what it is? It's not just land, not just laws. It's behavior, patterns, what it rewards, what it ignores, what it corrects. And if you look at America through that lens, you start to see something clearly. Progress here doesn't just happen. It gets pushed into existence. And a lot of that push comes from Black Americans consistently across time. Now here's the part that people don't always connect. That pressure doesn't weaken the country. It refines it, forces it to adjust, to improve, to evolve. Without that, you don't get the same level of growth. You get comfort, and comfort slows everything down. Now look at the results. Every time the system expands rights, opens access, creates more space for people to operate fully, the country doesn't fall apart. It gets stronger, more productive, more innovative, more competitive. That's not opinion. That's patent. Now flip it. Every time the system resists that expansion, delays it, blocks it, what happens? Tension rises, progress slows, problems stack up, and eventually it has to adjust anyway, just later, under more pressure. So the question becomes simple. Do you move forward early, or do you get dragged there later? Now, bring Black Americans back into the center of this, because that push, that pressure, that demand for the system to be better, that's been consistent. And it's created outcomes that go far beyond one group. It's shaped the entire country. Now here's where it gets deeper, because identity isn't just about the past. It's about direction, where you're going, what you choose to become. And right now, America is still making that choice, not in speeches, in actions, in policy, in opportunity, in who gets access to what. That's where identity shows up. Now think about the future. Technology changing everything. Global competition getting tighter. Economic shifts happening faster than ever. You don't navigate that by leaving potential unused. You don't win that way. You bring everything you have to the table. Everything. That includes the full strength of Black American contribution, not partial, not limited, full. Because anything less, you're choosing to operate below your capacity. Now let's get even more direct. The countries that lead in the future won't be the ones with the most resources. They'll be the ones that use their people the best. All of them. That's the real competition. Talent utilization. And America has a massive advantage there, but only if it actually uses it. Now here's the part that sticks. When you understand all of this, the question changes. It's not, do Black Americans matter to the country? That's already answered. The real question is, how much stronger could the country be if that contribution was fully unlocked? That's the question sitting on the table right now, and how it gets answered. That decides a lot. Now we're almost there, because there's one last piece, and this is the part people feel, not just understand. Because facts are one thing, but meaning, that's what stays. That's what people carry with them after the video ends. And if you've been following this the whole time, you already feel where this is going. Let's bring this down to something real, not systems, not theory, people. Because everything we've talked about, it shows up in real lives. Every day, a Black kid grows up in a system that doesn't fully expect him to win and still finds a way to build something. That's not normal pressure, that's weight. A Black woman walks into a space where she has to prove herself twice as much and still outperforms. That's not standard effort. That's excellence under pressure. A Black entrepreneur starts with less access to funding, less connections, less margin for error, and still creates something that works. That's not luck. That's skill. Now multiply that across millions of people, across generations. That's not individual success anymore. That's a pattern. That's a force. And that force has been shaping the country the entire time. Now, here's the part that shifts everything. When people hear this conversation, they sometimes think it's about recognition, like it's about saying, thank you. That's not it. Recognition doesn't change systems. Understanding does. Because once you understand the value of something, you treat it differently. You invest in it. You protect it. You scale it. That's how systems improve. Now think about what happens when that understanding is missing. People undervalue contributions. They make decisions that limit growth. They ignore opportunities sitting right in front of them. Not because they want to fail, because they don't see clearly. That's the issue. Clarity. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a country where the value of black contribution is fully understood. Not debated, not minimized, understood. That changes decisions. Education gets approached differently. Business investment shifts. Leadership pipelines open wider because now you're not guessing. You know what you're working with and you know it's worth maximizing. Now let's go one level deeper because this isn't just about what Black Americans give to the country. It's also about what the country becomes because of it. Stronger, more adaptable, more creative, more competitive. Those traits don't come from comfort. They come from challenge, from pressure, from being pushed to improve. And that push has been a constant. Now, here's something that sticks with people: resilience. People love that word, but they don't always understand where it comes from. It doesn't come from easy situations. It comes from overcoming difficult ones. And when that resilience becomes part of a country's culture, that country can handle more, adapt faster, recover quicker. That's an advantage, a real one. Now think about legacy, not history in a textbook. Legacy in motion, what gets passed down, skills, mindsets, approaches to solving problems. Black Americans have built a legacy of turning pressure into progress. That doesn't just stay in one community. It spreads, influences, shapes how others think and move. That's long-term impact. Now bring it back to the present, because all of this is still happening right now, in real time. New businesses being built, new ideas being created, new leaders stepping up. That momentum hasn't stopped. And if anything, it's picking up speed. Now here's the question that sits underneath everything. What do you do with that momentum? Do you ignore it, slow it down, or do you align with it? Because alignment creates growth every time. Now, let's get personal for a second, because this isn't just about America as a concept. It's about people living in it, building in it, trying to move forward in it. And when people feel like their contribution matters, they invest more, they build more, they stay engaged. That energy feeds the system. Now imagine the opposite. People feel overlooked, undervalued, disconnected. That energy drops. And when energy drops across a large group of people, the system feels it immediately or over time. Either way, it shows up. So this isn't abstract, it's practical. Now, we're at the point where everything connects: contribution, impact, strategy, identity, all tied together and leading to one final idea. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about what Black Americans have done. It's about what happens next. And that part, that's still being written. Let's end this properly, not with noise, with clarity. Because by now, one thing should be obvious. This was never just about the past. It was never just about culture. It was never just about credit. It was about direction, where things go from here. Now look at the bigger picture. Every strong system in history hits the same moment, a decision point. Keep operating at half capacity or fully utilize what's already inside it. That's it. That's the fork in the road. And countries don't fall behind because they have nothing. They fall behind because they don't use what they already have. Now bring everything back into focus. Black American contribution isn't a side effect of the system. It's part of the system's engine. It shows up in culture. It shows up in business. It shows up in science. It shows up in leadership. It shows up in innovation, not occasionally, consistently. That consistency matters more than anything because consistency is what builds civilizations. Now, here's where it gets real. The future is not slowing down. Technology is accelerating. Global influence is shifting. Competition is getting sharper. Every country is trying to figure out the same thing. How do we stay ahead? And the answer is not complicated. Use your full talent pool. No blind spots. No wasted potential. No ignored contributions. That's how you win in a high-speed world. Now zoom in again. Because this isn't just about strategy on paper. It's about real outcomes. Better schools, stronger businesses, more innovation, more cultural influence, more stability. Not because something new is invented, but because something already there is finally fully used. That's the difference. Now let's clear something up. This conversation isn't about placing one group above another. It's about recognizing what actually drives momentum. Because momentum doesn't care about politics. It responds to output, to creativity, to execution, to ideas that move things forward. And when those ideas come from everywhere in the system, everything accelerates. Now here's the truth most people miss. The biggest breakthroughs don't come from comfort. They come from people who had to think differently just to survive. That kind of thinking creates solutions others don't see. It creates culture others follow. It creates influence others adopt. And once that influence spreads, it doesn't stay contained. It reshapes everything it touches. Now think about where we are today. What's trending globally? What music travels fastest? What language spreads fastest? What culture gets copied fastest? None of that happens randomly. It happens because something is resonating at a deep level. And Black American culture has been one of the strongest sources of that resonance. Not because it was handed power, but because it created impact. Now step back one final time, because this is the full picture. A country is not judged by what it says about itself. It is judged by what it consistently produces and what it consistently protects and what it consistently develops. So the real question is not emotional, it's structural. Are you building a system that uses everything inside it, or one that leaves power unused because one of those systems leads and the other follows? Now here's the final thought. If everything we've talked about is true, then the future isn't complicated. It's just a matter of choice. Whether the system recognizes what it already has and builds around it fully, or continues underutilizing it and pays for it later. That's the decision point, and it's not abstract anymore. It's happening now, every day, in decisions, in opportunities, in access, in investment. Now, we finish where we started. Why does America need African Americans? Because without that contribution fully active, the system is incomplete. With it fully active, the system reaches its actual potential, not imagined, not theoretical, actual. And the countries that understand that first are the ones that move ahead, not slowly, not eventually, but decisively. Now the story doesn't end here. because this isn't history. This is ongoing. And what happens next depends on what people are willing to see and what they're willing to do with it.